Are you gaming at 1080p and watched all the shiny footage about the new CPUs and GPUs and are thinking to yourself, man, I should really upgrade to 1440p right now? Hold your horses, because I have some food for thought just for you. Oh boy, the last weeks really have been a joyride for gamers and PC enthusiasts. I think my consumption of YouTube videos for hardware, like reviews and speculations and benchmarks and leaks, has gone up by 1000%. There was really a lot to take in if you're interested in that kind of stuff. But as fascinating as it is to follow all that footage, mainly from people who get their stuff for free, it might be time for a little reality check here. According to Steam Hardware Review, most people still are gaming on 1080p and using a graphics card around the 1060 GTX, which is quite funny because exactly that was my setup just 4 weeks ago. And everyone said, wait, hold, don't buy new hardware now with all the new stuff coming out. Wait, the best bang for the buck now are the new cards with the higher performance at a lower price. But fact is, $500 is still a whole lot of money for most of us, and we're not even talking about availability here. And if you want to upgrade from 1080p to 1440p, you still need a new monitor and maybe even a new power supply to match all the new components. So it might be a good idea to look at some alternatives here. So how about upgrading your system to 1440p with a now last generation graphics card? How does it perform, and does it make sense from an economical point of view? Let's take a look at the hardware I'm talking about today. So you need a monitor, 1440p, high refresh rate. I linked two pretty reasonable models in the description down below. While they're not the cheapest, I think they're the best bang for your buck. Next question, what kind of GPU? Team Red versus Team Green. I was looking for strictly bang for your buck, and I stumbled upon a few videos from Hardware Unboxed. I linked them down below. They covered an RTX 5700 XT Red Devil from PowerColor, and they did it 3 times. When it was released 6 months later and another 5 or 6 months later. It showed that the card really gained in performance because of PCI Express 4.0, although just by a margin, and with the driver problem solved and with the new drivers in general. But there are a few other cards that should perform more or less just the same. I left the links also in the description. Now, what can you expect from a technical point of view? How does it perform? Well, let's jump into some games. In terms of graphic options, in general I chose the highest preset, usually Ultra, and then turned down 2 or 3 options like shadows, volumetric fog and post-processing if available to high. Usually you will hardly see any difference within the game and the performance will go up by 10 to 15 frames per second. The first game here is Anthem. I know it's not the most popular game, but it's pretty demanding and it still looks gorgeous. As with most open world games, in terms of performance, it depends on which zone you are in the game. So the more open spaces are usually a little bit lower in terms of frames per second, and the more enclosed areas are higher. So in the open world of Anthem you're usually getting, with this setup, 60 to 70, maybe 75 frames per second, and sometimes dropping under heavy load shortly down to 50 frames per second. So in general I would say in the wide open world spaces you get 60 to 70 frames per second, and in the more enclosed areas it is about 90 to 100 frames per second. Next game is The Division 2. Same settings here, Ultra, and then tuned down a few options to high. Here the frames in the open world space are about mid-60s to mid-80s, in the more enclosed areas up to 90 frames per second, and usually I would say around 70 to 75 frames per second in average. Next up we have Horizon Zero Dawn, which is also a pretty demanding game. Frames here are around 60-65 frames per second, sometimes dropping down to 50, sometimes spiking up to 70-75, so around 60, mid-60 frames per second overall. Next up we have Metro Exodus. Settings here are Ultra and Hairworks is turned off, Advanced Physics is turned on.
And with this setting we have about 65-75 frames per second in the more open areas, and then in the more enclosed zones we get 75-85 frames per second, so around about 70, mid-70 frames per second overall.
Let us conclude the technical part here. Everything shiny? Mostly, I would say. Let's go through the positive things first. Recent AAA titles you can expect on ultra settings something like 60 to 70 frames per second without any problem. If you go down to high settings, it should be around 70 to 80 frames per second. That's just a general rule of thumb, of course, and depending on your own individual system. Now, what really surprised me in a positive way was the general switch from 1080p to 1440p on a high refresh rate monitor. The experience is buttery smooth. With FreeSync enabled, there are no tearing effects at all. And the sharpness of the new monitor compared to 1080p is like putting on glasses. And I was surprised because I didn't expect it to be such a strong effect. But there are two things you have to keep in mind here. First of all, your GPU is running at maximum performance. That means it is clearly audible. Now, if the game is running at a very good performance, you can limit the frame rate in the Radeon settings with Radeon Chill, and it gives you a very good reduction in terms of noise. The other thing here is we are talking about recent AAA titles, and we don't know how new games utilize the new hardware in the future. But for now, my rough estimation here is that you should be absolutely okay for, let's say, the next 2 years. And that leads us right into the value question. So let's do some number crunching. I will keep this part brief and straightforward. So what is the market situation right now? Well, we had a nice paper launch of our new GPUs, and they might be available around Christmas 2021. But let's hope that situation gets better within the next 3 to 6 months. Keyword here is resale value, because the second-hand market is really strong in terms of price stability. And that means you can sell your old GPU for a reasonable price. I was able to get $140 for my 2-year-old GTX 1060 without any invoice or original packaging. With that in mind, let's put some numbers together. The monitors I linked cost around $330 to $350. I was able to get mine for $330. Graphics card like the 5700 XT Red Devil is selling on eBay as a used card for around $300 to $330, new cards $360 to $380. I was able to get mine for $360. And I sold my old card for $140. That leaves me with a total of $550 for a brand new setup including monitor and GPU. At that price I would just be able to get a new GPU if I could get my hands on one. And the second-hand market prices are expected to stay stable because of the high demand of PC parts in general. So I think I should be able to sell my card for $280 to $300 in the future if I choose to upgrade to a new GPU. Meanwhile, that leaves me with a perfectly running system, a brand new monitor, and 1 year time at least for savings if I want to go for a new GPU. If you find yourself in a similar situation like I was a few weeks ago, I hope this video provided some valuable information. With the high resale value of old GPUs, it might well be worth upgrading to 1440p right now using an old GPU. And if you liked this video, please subscribe and leave me a like, and don't forget, take care of yourself.